Greetings and welcome to History Addict, where the past comes alive through the voices of those who lived it. Today, we journey back to the fateful summer of 1876, to the heart of the Battle of Little Bighorn, as told through the first-hand account of Stanislas Roy, a sergeant of the 7th Cavalry. His story, though largely forgotten by time, reveals acts of courage, sacrifice, and tragedy amidst one of the most pivotal moments in American history. Before we delve into this compelling tale, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss an opportunity to explore more untold stories from the past. Your support allows us to continue sharing the legacies of those who shaped history. Now let us step back in time and follow in the footsteps of Stanislas Roy at Little Bighorn. On June 5th, our journey between Heart River and O'Fallon Creek was unexpectedly halted by a fierce snowstorm. The biting cold pierced through our layers, and the sudden shift in weather made the already arduous march even more punishing. As Stanislas Roy later recounted, the wagon train came to a stop near Powder River. Rather than continuing towards Rosebud as initially planned, the commanders made the difficult decision to turn back. During this detour, we passed through a valley lying between Miles City and Rosebud, where we observed Indian graves scattered across the landscape, a silent, poignant reminder of the land's troubled and violent history. Near the rugged expanse of Fort Keogh, Major Reno rejoined our column after completing his reconnaissance mission. As we pressed closer to the banks of the Rosebud River, a somber and unsettling sight met our eyes. Indian burial sites scattered in silence under the shelter of trees that bordered the lowlands. These sacred resting places, concealed from the careless eye, soon became the targets of a grievous violation. Soldiers from G Troop, in a moment of shocking disrespect, plundered the graves and cast the remains into the rushing waters of the Yellowstone River. Captain McIntosh, with grim forewarning, spoke of retribution that might befall those who so blatantly dishonored the dead, yet no measures were taken to prevent further desecration. The act left a deep wound in our collective conscience, for it marked a moment of irreversible insult to the native peoples, whose spirits surely bore witness to this sacrilege. As we advanced along the banks of the Rosebud River, a sight both majestic and haunting unfolded before our eyes. Vast herds of Indian ponies grazing freely on both sides of the trail, stretching as far as the eye could see. Roy's detailed journal, meticulously kept, recalls that on the 22nd of June, we broke camp approximately a mile east of the river's mouth. The terrain we entered felt alien and almost surreal, as if we had stepped into another world entirely, untouched by time or conflict. After cresting a low rise, we found ourselves once again following the course of the Rosebud, though we did not march directly along its banks. Instead, we kept to the western side, a strategic decision made perhaps in anticipation of the unknown perils that lay ahead. Roy's sharp observations lend weight to the belief that Custer's column, in their final fateful march, traversed a route strikingly close to what modern maps now reveal as a well-traveled road. This small yet significant detail, often overlooked by historians, speaks to the precise navigation and tactical choices that defined this campaign. Roy's writings also dispel a long-standing misconception. Bob Jackson and Billy Cross were never seen crossing at Ford A, nor were they spotted during the ensuing skirmishes. No one present recalled seeing either man in the valley or on the western side of the river, casting doubt on their roles in that fateful battle. Ford A itself, a makeshift crossing point, was only about 50 yards from a patch of timber. It was here that Reno led Companies G, A, and M in preparation for battle. We crossed the ford swiftly, forming a skirmish line, each man tense and apprehensive. A voice in the ranks murmured, "There goes Custer." And sure enough, we spotted him on the distant hills to our right, leading his men toward the unknown. We dismounted some 200 yards from the timber, where Company G took the right flank, A the center, and M the left. In this moment of intense preparation, Roy's observations bring to light a critical and often overlooked fact. There was no cover of timber to the right of our line, leaving us vulnerable and exposed. Ahead, concealed by the thick trees, native warriors began to fire upon us from an oblique angle, their shots a constant menace. Our skirmish line stretched further west than the maps would later depict, a detail Roy was careful to record. Amid the chaos of the battlefield, Roy's memory remained sharp. He saw Charlie Reynolds, though gravely wounded, still gripping his pistol with resolve, trying in vain to rally the retreating troops. Despite the injuries he had sustained, Reynolds' courage did not falter, a testament to the unyielding spirit that defined these men in the face of overwhelming odds. Amidst the tumultuous skirmish, Roy's steed was grievously wounded, momentarily rendering him helpless as the beast faltered. By what seemed a providential turn, however, the horse veered right, guiding its rider to a fleeting safety. Recalled from the front lines, Roy found himself desperately in need of a mount. Encountering Captain Wallace, who was struggling to lead G Troop amidst the chaos, Roy implored after his lost horse. Wallace, with the grim practicality born of battlefield command, simply retorted, "Find whatever horse you can and make haste away." The field was rife with confusion, despair settling heavily upon the men. Roy later reflected that he had held his position on the line for no more than 20 minutes, discharging perhaps 20 rounds before the retreat was sounded. The sight of ravines swarming with Indian warriors, their rifles aimed relentlessly at our lines, carved a memory into Roy's mind that would never fade. From his vantage, he observed yet more warriors, swift and determined, fording the river to maneuver around our eastern flank in a calculated effort to encircle us. As Roy ventured deeper into the woods, he came upon Gilbert, who was struggling to manage 4 horses, one of which belonged to Roy himself. With little time to spare, Roy swiftly mounted, urging Gilbert to follow. Yet their progress was hindered by the rough terrain and constant threat of attack. In the midst of the chaos, as bullets whizzed past, Roy's mount was struck, a bullet shattering the horse's jaw. Despite the grievous wound, the loyal beast carried its rider valiantly toward safety, only to falter near the riverbank where it finally succumbed to its injuries. It was a sight that weighed heavily on Roy as he dismounted and sought another way forward, the cacophony of battle unrelenting around him. As we crossed the river, its waters rose to the horse's belly, adding to the danger. Upon reaching the far side, we ascended the bluff, though Roy's horse, badly injured, was left behind. At the top, rumors swirled that Reno would soon join Custer, but the mood was grim. Roy reported to Captain Moylan that he was now dismounted, only to receive the stoic reply, "Find one." The urgency of the situation was clear. Being stranded without a horse on such treacherous ground was nearly a death sentence. As night descended upon the weary troops on June 25th, the relentless cacophony of gunfire gradually diminished, though the weight of the day's battle hung heavy in the air. Among our ranks, King, one of our bravest comrades, had fallen wounded, his cries muffled amidst the growing dusk. There was no time for respite. In the fading light, we hastily constructed breastworks, crude but vital, to shield us from the next inevitable wave of attacks. The earth beneath our hands felt cold, but the threat lingering in the darkness beyond was colder still. That same night, Major Reno, ever vigilant, called for volunteers to guard the perimeter. At first, hesitation swept through the ranks, for each man knew the peril that awaited those who took up the task. Yet it was Roy who broke the silence, stepping forward with grim resolve. Alongside him stood Privates Connor, Gilbert, Bancroft, and McClurg, men bound by duty if not by choice. The weight of Reno's command was unmistakable. Should the Indians strike at dawn, the men were to scatter and make for the breastworks, their lives hanging by the thinnest of threads. At dawn on June 26th, with the pale light of morning barely touching the horizon, the Sioux, relentless in their pursuit, launched yet another attack upon our weary ranks. Roy, ever vigilant, directed his men to retreat with discipline, crouching low amidst the coarse grass and sagebrush that dotted the battlefield. The scorching sun soon rose overhead, intensifying both the heat of battle and the thirst of the men. Deprived of water for nearly 2 days, some soldiers, maddened by thirst, began to chew on the dry, bitter blades of grass in a vain attempt to moisten their parched mouths. By midday, a brief rain shower passed over us, though it brought little relief to our dire condition. The water, scant as it was, evaporated quickly under the oppressive heat, and one soldier, his mind broken by the ordeal, succumbed to delusion, wandering aimlessly as the fighting raged on. Desperation set in as the men clamored for water, their pleas becoming more fervent with each passing hour, while the enemy's relentless assaults continued unabated. In the early hours of the afternoon, a contingent of 19 volunteers was assembled, tasked with the perilous mission of retrieving water from the river. Ultimately, 12 men were selected for this critical undertaking. Each man bore 2 canteens and several camp kettles, preparing themselves for the hail of gunfire that surely awaited them. Among the volunteers was Private Peter Thompson, along with several sharpshooters, whose duty was to safeguard the timberline on the west bank and prevent the Sioux from gaining a foothold in that vital position. Despite their vigilance, the riverbank remained treacherous, with Sioux and Cheyenne warriors stationed strategically, ready to fire upon any who dared approach the water. The descent down the exposed bluff was perilous, with the men forced to dash across 100 yards of open terrain, fully exposed to enemy fire. Once they reached the ravine, its concealment offered a brief respite before the final sprint to the river. Madden, the third man to make the attempt, was struck by a bullet that shattered his leg. Despite his grievous wound, he displayed remarkable fortitude, managing to drag himself back to safety. The water party pressed on for nearly an hour, filling canteens and kettles under constant threat. Upon their return to the hilltop, the precious water was rationed among the wounded. Dr. Henry Porter worked relentlessly to tend to the suffering, though the meager supply of water could scarcely meet the dire needs of the men. As the night of June 26th descended, the fury of gunfire began to wane, allowing us a brief respite from the chaos. By the dim light of the evening, we hastily dug additional trenches, securing the vital route to the river, for we knew that the thirst of the men and beasts alike would soon reach a critical point. That same evening, a small party, among them Lieutenant Charles DeRudio, miraculously found their way back to camp. Presumed dead by many, their return offered a fleeting glimmer of hope amidst the oppressive gloom that had settled upon us. Yet, even as we welcomed them, a sense of unease lingered. The withdrawal of the Sioux might well be a ruse designed to draw us into a false sense of security. By the pale dawn of June 27th, we mustered the resolve to lead the horses down to the river, for they, like us, had suffered the tortures of thirst. It was a pitiful sight. These once proud animals, now gaunt and feeble, plunged their heads deep into the cool waters, driven by a desperation born of days without drink. The scene reminded us of our own fragile state, as if the land itself sought to bring both man and beast to their knees in this cruel, unrelenting struggle. The arrival of Gibbon's 7th Infantry on the battlefield marked a pivotal turning point in the aftermath of the harrowing battle. As their camp was established near the very site where Captain McIntosh had fallen, they immediately demonstrated the deep camaraderie of soldiers, offering whatever supplies they had. Sugar, lemons, and other comforts were shared with those of us who had been wounded, a gesture of compassion amidst the desolation of war. On June 28th, I was given a somber duty, one I would not soon forget. The horses that had been grievously wounded and abandoned during our retreat could no longer be saved. With a heavy heart, I was ordered to put them down. It was a necessary task, yet each gunshot felt like another loss, a reminder of the sacrifices that extended far beyond the men themselves. Later that same day, we turned to the grimmest task of all, burying our dead. Our path led us to the battlefield where General Custer and his men had made their final stand. As we made our way across the blood-soaked ground, the oppressive stench of death was inescapable, clinging to the air and pressing upon our senses. The first body we came upon was that of Corporal John Foley, lying alone, 3/4 of a mile away from where the majority of the fallen rested. In the eerie stillness, one of the men quietly remarked, "There lies Foley of C Company." His bald head and dark hair made him instantly recognizable, even in death. We stood there for a moment in silence, the weight of the battlefield heavy upon us all. As we began the arduous task of burying him, the reality of the scene struck me. Foley had perished far from his comrades, a solitary figure in a field of carnage. The burial process was swift yet reverent. The men were laid to rest along the western slope of the ridge, the earth hastily covering the remains of soldiers who had given everything in their final stand. With each passing moment, the smell of decay grew more overwhelming. At times, it was almost too much to bear, but we pressed on, driven by duty and the knowledge that these men deserved at least this final respect. I recall stepping away briefly to the river, desperate to clear my throat and lungs of the foul air. As the sun set on that somber day, we had only just begun to scratch the surface of the true toll the battle had taken. The silence that hung over the ridge was deafening, broken only by the murmur of exhausted men reflecting on the grim scenes before them. The burden of war, it seemed, was not only in the heat of battle, but also in the quiet moments that followed. Stanislas Roy, a French-born sergeant in Company A of the 7th Cavalry, was among the many men who fought valiantly during the infamous Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. While Roy did not receive the Medal of Honor, his actions, alongside those of his comrades, reflect the incredible courage and sacrifice that defined the battle. The infamous clash, which saw the complete annihilation of General Custer's battalion, left a lasting mark on American history. Though not as well known as some, Roy's legacy endures as a symbol of the determination and perseverance of the ordinary soldier who, under the weight of overwhelming odds, stood firm in the face of death. Roy continued to serve his country in subsequent campaigns and passed away in 1913, leaving behind a legacy entwined with one of the most tragic and fiercely contested conflicts of the American frontier.